and welcome to today's session for the Nottingham Tech for Good Festival. My name's Paul Bailey. I'm one of the organisers. I'm really excited today to introduce you to Jen. But first of all, just tell you a little bit about the Nottingham Tech for Good Festival. It's a 4-day celebration exploring how technology can be used to shape a fairer, kinder and more sustainable future. We've got over 20 events. We've still got 2 days to go, and over 500 people have signed up to attend the sessions over those 4 days. If you've not looked at the schedule already, take a look at www.nt4g.org/schedule, and you can have a look at what sessions are still available. So I'm going to hand over to Jen and I'll disappear. Jen, it's over to you.
Hi there. Lovely to be here this morning and to get to talk about things that I enjoy talking about, which today is all about kind of creativity, computation, and we're going to talk a little bit about imagination at the end. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully this will all be relatively seamless. It's reminding me of COVID times when we used to do this in universities an awful lot. And we'll play from the start. And oh, do you know what? I've just done a final tweak on my presentation. I'm so sorry. This is most unprofessional. But I've just done a final tweak to give you my LinkedIn at the end, and I've got my end and beginning slides mixed up. So let me fix that. And now I'm going to start proper. Share my screen. And hopefully that is all good.
Good.
Thanks, Paul. So good afternoon. I'm Jen. I am a senior lecturer at Nottingham Trent University, and I teach fashion, marketing and branding. I'm also an active researcher and practitioner, and within that context, I make a lot of stuff. So in terms of the kind of stuff that I like to make, these are all things that I have historically made. These have all come from the kind of Web3 space, NFTs and kind of fizzy digital artwork. So I make physical stuff, I make digital stuff. I just like to make things. But I also work with experience and immersion. So I make stuff like this that is physical because we might deliver something live, but also digital because we'll use technology in the process of creation. This is some of the stuff that I have been working on this past week. I'm involved in an immersive art project, and this is one of the pieces that I've been pulling together using AI technologies to kind of, imagine the process of growth and of things coming to life and of generation across kind of different natural and technological boundaries and borders. So this is a little bit of Nottingham heritage and Nottingham lace that I've been generating and animating and getting to move around. So when I say I make stuff, it's pretty broad. It can be anything from the kind of the very intimate and personal to sort of the more grandiose, and that's going to be projected on a screen that's 5 meters high and 22 meters wide next week. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the kind of next chunk of time relates to artificial intelligence. And with that in mind, I thought a nice place to start was to ask you a question. And Paul's going to kindly kind of look at the responses for me as they come in. And my first question to you is, what was your last prompt? And, I'm assuming at this point we're sort of a good 2 years in, 3 years in to our experience with AI as people and humans and consumers. And I think most of us are using AI technologies in some degree of our life, whether that's a chatbot that you've asked why your online supermarket order hasn't arrived, or whether it's something like ChatGPT or a more creative kind of platform like the ones I'm often using to kind of help you imagine things and bring things to life. So I know this is quite a personal question for me to posit and put to you kind of right at the beginning of this talk, but no judgment. This is a completely safe space. So as long as it's safe for work, we will not judge anybody's responses to the question, what was your last prompt? And we'll give you just a few moments to have a bit of a think about it and to post it. And Paul can let us know if anyone has been brave enough to give us their last prompt. And what I would say is that mine, are not always, the most intellectual, despite the fact that I work in a university and teach people and have studied hard for a PhD. This morning, I was making a chameleon with a pink hat and a pair of dungarees. And these were my prompts. Bright chameleon. I spelt yellow wrong, but yellow, orange, pink, green, big bulging eyes, standing on back legs, wearing a neon pink trucker hat and denim outfit on a grey and white checkerboard background. And after I'd fed that into the Flux model on Creo, I then used the 1-2 model to turn that little visual of a chameleon into a talking chameleon. And this chameleon will be having a conversation with itself next week for a project I've got going on. So, Paul, has anyone been brave enough to give us their last prompt?
Nobody's brave enough yet, but maybe we're overthinking it.
Maybe we're overthinking it. Yeah. And actually maybe it feels a little bit personal because the relationships we develop with artificial intelligence and with the platforms that we're working on don't necessarily feel like things you always want consumed by everyone else. So it's fine for me with preparation to have given you my prompt and show you what I'm quite, it's quite a nifty little output there with my talking chameleon. I'm quite happy with that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're all comfortable. And that is totally fine too. And I think that there's not the topic of today's talk, but thinking about the kind of relational side of prompting and of artificial intelligence is also really interesting because
We have, we've got a few coming now, Jen.
oh, fantastic.
Okay. What does it need to level up using subtraction using Claude.ai was one prompt. Another prompt was based on the attached document, provide me with a list of the key events from the rise of Hitler. Oh, that's heavy. Oh no, actually that gets clarified. I'm helping my daughter with her GCSEs.
I mean that feels like a good use of it, dare I say, in terms of building a relationship with the family, helping out, and kind of accessing all the world's knowledge in a slightly easier format than Wikipedia. Brill. And the subtraction one, I wonder if that's more GCSEs or if that's more about leveling up. But kind of nice to see that people are using Claude, that there are lots of different platforms that we can all use. And I think that plurality of experience, the fact that we're not all on the same thing as we're blindly generating all this content is also to be celebrated. So I did have another question. And again, it will be interesting to see if this even means anything to anyone, I guess, in terms of jumping on an AI trend. And I've got an idea of what I mean by this, and we'll show you through a couple of pictures. But before I do, it would be if anybody has sort of jumped on an AI trend and put in a prompt that maybe wasn't their own and that somebody else had suggested, that would be good to know. Because of course, there have been, certainly in the last 6 months or so, some fairly key AI trends that have made their way through social media. The doll trend, have you made yourself a doll, was all the rage. I did not make myself a doll and thought rather than using artificial intelligence to do that, I would just grab somebody else's doll because it wasn't content that I felt like I wanted to put out into the world. It wasn't where I wanted my creativity to go. But this middle management or manage spelling error management man, is an example of a trend that certainly my news feed was completely swamped by over the course of a few days, as this kind of make yourself a doll thing erupted. This was another one that I saw posted from LinkedIn on several different colleagues' accounts, and it was quite hilarious. I won't lie. The prompt was act like my drunk bestie and tell me what you think I do. And then hilarity ensues as ChatGPT gives you these slightly hilarious responses, and you might then ask it for career advice. But in doing that, he's also like your cheerleader, and tells you how fantastic you are at your job while you're doing what you're doing, through, of course, mining all your social accounts and all the interactions you're having with people in your email, because it can read all of that to be able to give you this, this insight. And then finally, and this one maybe, I think, definitely ruffled a few feathers given how many Studio Ghibli fans there are in the world, and how that as creative generation is this kind of incredibly laborious, very, very time intensive human endeavor. The idea that you just sort of flip your pictures and your holiday snaps into a Studio Ghibli inspired meme or picture, didn't sit that well with a lot of areas of the internet. And wherever you stand on that, an awful lot of compute power around the world was used in this kind of, through this little mini social trend, manifested itself on all our social feeds if you're on social media. So yeah, if you did this, if you didn't do it, it's more about the fact that this is existing. This is where the internet is going at the minute, which for me is kind of interesting. And I'm posing this question for us all to think about. You don't have to put this one in the chat, but it'd be great to have a bit of dialogue about this kind of maybe when we're finished. And the question is AI just the next tool for clicks, likes, and social engagement? So, all of those examples that I showed you became little mini micro trends that bubbled up for a week and then kind of left the news cycle as other things were happening. And within that, there's a lot to unpack. If I sort of put my teacher hat on, you can talk about the attention economy. You can talk about the fact that we're also kind of addicted to our computers and to the gratification that we might get from 26 likes or 16 comments, that we're chasing the next thing to be able to put ourselves out there in a digital way. And is AI is kind of like, from a user perspective, one of the things that is happening with it is that it's fueling this kind of next iteration of social channels, whether that's kind of video on TikTok or kind of image or text on something like ChatGPT. And actually, I think that leads us quite nicely to start to think about a bit of a pause for critique, because all of these platforms and all AI, whether we're looking at large language models or whether we're looking at kind of image generation, video generation, or AI agents, which, are kind of, the next big thing hiding around the corner that we're all going to be adopting and using apparently in the next 6 months to a year. There is critique inherent in all of that, and in technology broadly, and particularly when something's new, because we need to really look at it and ask, are we comfortable using it? Is the kind of sacrifice and the payoff that we make to access these tech worth it in terms of what it gives to us? And when we think about AI, kind of my big list of critique, and hopefully, some of these feel really familiar and some of them you might not have thought about before. But, there's been a lot written about training, around what we're kind of the data sets we're using. So that's both the process of training, who's doing the training, the data sets that we're training these models on. I think there's kind of really fascinating observations to be made about actually consumer behavior and the UX of a lot of these products. The environment and the environmental impact is, it is a concern, and climate change I certainly think climate change is real. And within that, I do often think, do I need to hit generate before I generate something? And particularly if I'm working with big immersive projects where I need really high definition, I'll often test in low definition first and then run a high definition set so that I'm not doing everything using all that compute power. And then for me, the other thing that I think we can critique, which sort of comes out of my opening and intro, is this kind of idea of banal output. And was it really worth it? Did you need AI to do that for you? So just to unpick each of those a little bit before we come out the other end and then start to look at hopefully what I'm going to frame as a more optimistic future and reading in the time of imagination. If you haven't ever looked at or thought about the way that AI models are trained, I've got a couple of links for you here. You can, if you can see it and you want to just pop it in on your phone or your computer, these are both very decent articles, and they're talking about the same thing from a slightly different perspective. But this is essentially the workforce that is used to train the data sets. So the people who sit at images saying this one is good, this one is bad. Do you recognize this one as bad? Yes, the computer does. We'll move on to the next one. But inherent within that process is that the people doing that very manual labor and having to categorize and tag and add the metadata to these images is that to be able to tell AI what is good and what is acceptable, if you're OpenAI, you also need to tell it what is bad and unacceptable. And this isn't new knowledge, but these articles sort of started appearing about a year and a half ago, trying to lift the lid on how these very big companies from the global north are using workforces and paying them considerably less than they'd have to pay them in their domestic territories to go to do this horrific work. A lot of this content has been scraped from the dark web, and is things that as humans we shouldn't really want to see. And the fact that people seek them out, when we're talking about kind of images of murder and atrocities and all sorts of horrible stuff. And if that's your job and you're doing it every day, there's something deeply kind of from a sort of social and a moralistic perspective, something deeply challenging and upsetting about the fact that we think we can just farm that work out to people on the other side of the world, who aren't going to be benefiting from the product and these models in the same way. So the whole of AI has been built on this system that is essentially kind of not necessarily, it hasn't been built from a point of equality. It's been built from a point of exploitation. And then if we sort of move on from that, of course, the thing that all the big kind of AI platforms are doing when they're building their models is they're scraping the internet. So yes, we've got people in Kenya over there looking at stuff from the dark web, and traumatizing themselves by having to kind of review that content to tag it as harmful. And then we've also got all the data that we have been responsible for putting out there over the last 20 years being kind of scraped, which in a way is brilliant, right? Part of me feels this is super exciting because that is the sum of humanity. We've got archive material on there from projects that were, that have, pieces of art that were created thousands of years ago. And then we've got, my niece's kind of Instagram feed from university where she's having fun and out in bars at night. We've got the whole gamut of human behavior, but what we've also got is probably a data set that kind of from the last 20 years of the internet is hugely populated with things from the last 20 years of life. So what we've been feeding these platforms, it is a mirror of us, and that isn't always positive. If we think of kind of what a lot of those Web2 social media companies were getting up to around 2016, at the point at which the Cambridge Analytica scandal was happening, and you had Facebook, now Meta, sort of accused of toying with the algorithms to try and sort of sway public opinion. We've had lots of stuff on social media that doesn't feel positive, and we're all aware of the kind of increasing polarization of public opinion in lots of different ways, and all of that is feeding into the scraping, that feeds into the models, that feeds into the person that we're conversing with, or not the person, the platform that we're conversing with when we talk to ChatGPT or Claude or Midjourney or Creo or whatever it is you're using. So, again, this one, maybe not bad, maybe not good, but we need to be critical and we need to be thinking around kind of, well, what does that mean in terms of what we're getting back? And this is one of my favorites that I'm sort of looking forward to learning more about and thinking more about. So I use AI quite a lot, particularly in my audiovisual work. And if you're an AI user, you will know that with a lot of these platforms, when you're image generating, you sign up per month and then you run out of credits. But you run out of credits, and instead of going, oh, well, never mind, I'll do some more next month, you just press top up my credits, and then you hastily give your credit card details and kind of go again on the fruit machine of AI and see what your next image generation is, or see what your next video generation is. And there's been something I think that's really interesting about kind of the user experience that's been built into a lot of these platforms, the tokenization of AI. So we're never told when we generate an image that's going to cost you 26p. We're told that's going to cost you 20 credits, which takes you away from the financial commitment and makes you it changes your consumer behavior, because it's kind of rewiring your brain with a different value system. So again, this is like, is this problematic? Is it bad? Is it good? I don't know if there's a problem here, but when we're thinking about some of the challenges posed, then I think we need to recognize that actually there have been mechanisms built in that very much feel like they're kind of borrowing from Web 2 and borrowing from that kind of compulsive need to act online in a certain way and to kind of be chasing the next thing, that make us want to engage with the with AI platforms. The environmental impact of AI is, it's electricity, it's energy, it's compute power. There's the thing that kind of does the rounds and gets spoken about quite a lot, which is every time you ask AI to do something for you, it's the equivalent of boiling a kettle. And this is just a bit of a kind of, if you're interested in this at all, I would highly recommend following Sasha Lucioni. She is the AI climate lead at Hugging Face. So what you get from a lot of her content is this idea that, yes, we have progress on the one hand, but we need to be thinking about the planet on the other. And I sort of hope that as the AI dialogue progresses, we get more voices really kind of pairing these two things up in the same conversation. And then the banal content element that I will kind of come back to again. There is a question when you're playing with AI that I think you should always have in the back of your mind of, do I need to make this? Can I do this myself? As a human, do I need a machine to support me at this point? Is it providing me with a platform to be able to enhance what I'm doing? Or am I just either being lazy or being silly or adding to the kind of the noise in the world, like, make me into a toy, kind of trend that hit a few weeks back. But of course there are opportunities, because as soon as you talk problems, we also talk opportunities. So kind of having presented what I think are some of the challenges toward AI, particularly when we're thinking about creativity, there's something really exciting also about thinking about what lies ahead. And these for me are some of the key ways that we can start to think about AI and frame it as a mechanism for good, particularly in regard to creativity, creative thinking and imagination. Now, the Web3 space, and I didn't put a slide in for this, and I probably should have done. When I teach, I talk a lot about Web 1, Web 2 and Web 3. Web 1 is kind of your read internet. Early days of the internet in the 90s, you logged on, you could read what was on the screen. We progressed into the noughties after the millennium, and we got Web 2, where suddenly, as consumers, we could also contribute to the internet. So that was read write. And social media really is the biggest kind of, when we talk Web 2, we mean social media, really. So all your big platforms, the five fang giants, as they often get called in terms of those massive tech companies, who are enabling people to contribute and then using that data to profit. And then Web 3, which, may or may not be the next iteration of the internet, which is where we get into read, write, and ownership. And the difference is that in Web 3, the sort of thought paradigm behind it is that the user should own their data and therefore be in control of it and have a choice about how they want to profit or not from their data and their activity online. So ownership is key to Web3. And there are some really interesting examples of Web3 AI that are saying we need to be training models and giving the people who are providing the training data a stake in the model, for example. So Grass is one project on the Solana network that's kind of really exciting in terms of trying to give contributors to the data set and ownership over the product and control over their own input. I think another opportunity within AI is kind of the idea that AI is the problem solver in chief, and that if we can get good enough at working with AI, it will help us solve some of the problems we found ourselves in, whether that's around energy consumption, whether that's around kind of bigger problems in the world like scarcity of water or migration or climate change, then if we can use AI to help us solve those problems, maybe it'll do a better job than us. And renewable energy, it's, the big tech companies are investing in nuclear energy because they recognize that if AI is going to become what they're planning for, then there needs to be a mechanism to bring the costs down and to kind of, change how we think about the extractive energy policy across the world. So even though we know that at the moment we're at this kind of crunch point where we're using huge amounts of energy and we're doing it in a very extractive way because most of what we're using isn't renewable, there's going to have to be a shift in balance, and maybe AI will help us with that. However, the banal output is one that maybe doesn't feel like there's quite a kind of, a neat and tidy solution for in the same way. And that is where creativity comes in. Now, when I kind of sent Paul the abstract for this talk a while ago, I talked about the imagination deficit. And when I opened it up again, I felt really cross with myself that I'd done something that was inherently coming from this point of view of negativity and talking about a deficit, when actually this whole program is about technology for good. So instead of talking about the imagination deficit, I'm going to talk about creativity as something that is kind of really important when we think about how we use AI. And one of the reasons that for me AI has been really empowering, and this is kind of from a hugely personal perspective actually, is that I've always been a creative person, but I've never really necessarily had the skills to be able to do what I want to do creatively. So my career, if my CV has all these different words on it of things I've dipped in and out of, and tried to, sort of, like a lot of academics, we try out a lot of things and then we go, let's go and teach them to people. But I've worked in production, I've directed things, I've performed, I've made art, I'm a researcher, I'm a lecturer, all of these things which creativity is absolutely important for. But what I've found with AI is that suddenly my own personal creativity is sort of turbo powered by what I can achieve through pairing my creativity with my inherent kind of criticality. And when I say inherent, now it is inherent, but that's because I've had a career developing my criticality. I've spent a lot of time in different places, working on different projects with different people to get to a point where I understand things like visual communication visual literacy, where I kind of, I mean, taste is a highly subjective word, but often those sort of notions of what is going to kind of culturally land or culturally kind of resonate come from an inherent criticality that you've developed over a long period of being in the world and of seeing things and of being exposed to loads of different stimuli. And the reason that I've chosen to kind of put these coming into focus is that I've found from a very, very personal level that what AI has really helped me with is it's helped my creativity and criticality flourish, because I had those things anyway. And when I pair them with communication, I've got a friend that can start to make content with me, that can start to bring my ideas to life, whether that's kind of writing something or whether that's working with kind of more visual stimuli. So the idea that we have all this banal content in the world that we really don't need any more of. It's sort of taking up space on the cloud. It's taking up space in our brains when we see everyone posting their Ghibli inspired imagery on YouTube. And actually, as a human race, I think we can do better if we use our creativity and we use our criticality and we use our communication skills to work with AI in a more positive way. Interestingly, Microsoft have been talking about these sorts of things for years, in terms of what are the things people are going to need as we undergo a digital revolution. So none of these ideas are necessarily new ideas, but by pairing them and framing them in the context of what can we create and why should we create it, hopefully they make the argument for a kind of education that actually in this country can often feel like it's been lost through that kind of really rigorous examination process. So having just sort of positioned why I think those things are really important, I want to have a little think about AI and the future and imagination. And I've got a couple of quite what might be left field references. I don't know. Paul, you'll have to tell me if I've gone too far in one direction. Now, I've listened on YouTube as to how to say this word because I've only ever seen it written. And apparently it's psychotrophy. And I'll tell you what that means in a moment. But I also want to talk about ideology and outlook and why that's so important when we think about imagination and the future. I want to think about the future as something that is plural, and I kind of want to end with a bit of a challenge for us all in terms of what do we use this technology for and how are we going to prioritize our imaginations within our relationship with it. Psychotrophy is it's an animal who eats its own waste. And when we think about the future, we need to really seriously think about a world that we create where AI is essentially training itself on what it has created through us. And we are living in this cycle of recycled kind of banal content that has been created by AI with not as much imagination or criticality or creativity as it could have been created with. And it morphs into this very sort of scary hyper reality where everything we see is through the lens of artificial intelligence. And I worry about that as someone who is engaged in the creative process on a weekly basis and who teaches young people how to be creative. I worry that if we cannot get people using AI with a different mindset and putting their creativity first rather than their convenience or rather than their kind of personal need for dialogue, that we are going to end up in a world that we have distorted through this kind of training process of we generate, the AI trains itself, and we get so far removed because everything's just being trained on a data set that is artificially generated to begin with. So there's a slight fear there, and within that fear is the argument as to why approaching this creatively is critical. Now, I'll press play on my little video as I talk to you about ideology, because people, one of the things I love about technology is that code doesn't know who you are. Technology is fairly agnostic. It's what people do with the technology that gives it meaning. So if we think about ideology, we know what Trump and Musk, we know what they stand for, right? We know the future that they're imagining with artificial intelligence. We know who privileges from it, and we know who maybe doesn't privilege from it, because they're very open about what their ideology is. They imagined it, and then they've used all sorts of tools to bring it to life and to persuade other people that it's a really good idea. They're using AI and other technologies in a really sophisticated way to engage people. And it's they've taken them along. They've painted a picture, they've used their imagination and taken people on a journey, and now they're running the world. However, there are alternate futures and alternate ideologies that might also be just as compelling. So this is an image, it's a watercolor picture, and it's of what the world might look like in a kind of solar punk imagining. And solar punks believe that technology will be the thing to save the world from environmental ruin. They believe in a future where technology and nature coexist in harmony and are kind of mutually symbiotic. And both of the futures that have been painted by these two images are about technology, but they are ideologically very, very different. So when we think about tech, we need to give ourselves more responsibility and more credit in how we use them, because technology, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad, but it's the people who push it in those directions. So we need to give ourselves some credit for the agency that we have within that process. And the future is plural. It might look like this. We might be solar punk optimists who think the world is going to be a beautiful kind of, experience of robots and of butterflies and of technology and nature all coalescing together. Or the future might look like this. And we might be eternal pessimists who aren't sure kind of where to go and what to do and how to make ourselves happy within this kind of scary, world that's mapped out in front of us. But this is my call to arms, if you like, for all the optimists in the world to recognize that actually it's through creativity and it's through your criticality and asking questions about this technology and approaching it with a critical lens. And it's through how we communicate with artificial intelligence that we can imagine a life that is better. We can imagine a planet that we can bring back from the brink of destruction in terms of climate change, and that we can use our imaginations in partnership with AI to create something brilliant. That's what I've talked about. I'd love to hear if there are any questions, and that's my LinkedIn. If anybody would like to get in touch and connect, it would be great to hear from you and get any feedback. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Jen. Brilliant talk. It's always really hard to do that because you can't see anybody, so you don't know how people reacting. So well done for kind of holding it together and giving us a really interesting perspective. I think I'm glad you kind of shifted the end of the presentation and the direction that it was going in, and like presented it and like, okay, well, let's think about the possibility as well. I guess if you've got a question, if you want to pop it into the chat, and we will try and answer it over the next kind of 5 minutes or so. I've got a question generally, I guess. How are you seeing your students adapt? What are they? What's surprising you about how they're adopting this technology? Because I guess I always think I'm a bit of a kind of an old fuddy-duddy, and you're probably a bit out of touch with what's happening at that level. Have you seen anything that surprised you?
So one of the things that's great is that I think that for students, and I'll sort of put my hand up and say I'm really dyslexic too. And if I'd have had this when I was a student, I might have got a first instead of a 2-1. And that for students who do struggle with kind of neurodivergence and writing, I think that particularly the large language models and your kind of co-pilots and chat GPTs can be incredibly helpful in both helping them organize what they're doing and organize their thinking and their approach to research, and then kind of, through to editing. Conversely, if you're not very critical and you're not engaged in the world, you use AI and your output does not make sense. So if you're someone who's fantastically curious and you want to understand the world, then AI can help you do that, and it can help you organize how you think and work. If you're someone who isn't inherently curious and who sort of struggles to ask those difficult questions and do what we would call kind of higher level thinking, then actually the AI can't help you with that, because it just spits stuff out that you don't understand and that we have to read. And then it isn't that exciting. So in a sense, it's not had. I don't feel like it has a major impact on grades, and it has. And I know there's a lot of there's been a lot in the news this past week about how everybody is cheating, and we just need to, go. Everyone comes from this point of view of everything's been through AI. But actually, you can spot it. You can read bad AI and you can read good AI, and it's just a tool like anything else. So I think most use it for writing, and I sort of they use it to write because it makes writing easier. But the really good ones can do it themselves and use it as an aid. Image generation, I'm amazed at how young people are. No, it's not that people are scared, but there's definitely an internal dialogue around is this going to take my job? And maybe that I need to learn to do something as a human before I go and let the machine do it all. Which I think is really, really interesting. And I would encourage anyone to learn how to do things as a human, because I think it brings us much more joy than sitting on a computer hitting generate all day. But it also, there's something that we hear in universities a lot, which is you're never going to lose a job to AI, but you'll lose a job to another graduate who knows how to use AI better than you. And I have a bit of an issue with that. And you'll probably, from the presentation, I think this echoes that, because I think the most powerful graduates will be people who can use AI, who can also be very human, but who understand the complexity of artificial intelligence. So who are asking those critical questions, who understand with the data set that maybe you can't trust it all the time and you have to do your own part of it. So I think people who blindly trust, there's a Venn diagram somewhere, isn't there? There's kind of blind trust on one side and criticality on the other. And then the people in the middle who are using it and who are embracing it, but doing it with a critical lens, I think are going to be best placed.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. Definitely, I think I read something recently from the World Economic Forum. It talks about the future skills, and the core skills are around things like critical and creative thinking, communication, and collaboration. And AI can help with all of those things, but it probably can't replace them. So if you don't develop those skills early on, it makes it difficult. Do you teach like prompting then? Is that part of? Do students get some?
We teach prompting. Yeah, they I mean, a lot is kind of go and do it yourself because it's so accessible. It's not, I mean, I remember trying to learn Adobe in the early noughties when I was a student, and it just feeling like my head was about to explode. And I think there is an accessibility with this technology that means people should be giving it a try regardless. But there are frameworks. I have a colleague, Ian Campbell Cole, who's has fantastic frameworks for students, which really kind of break it down and pull out, kind of pull out what you need to be asking for, to be able to have control. And sometimes I would then argue that it's good to give the AI control, and it's knowing when to kind of pull and push back through in that creative process. So yeah, we do teach prompting, and I think most students say the more they engage with the teaching, the better the output gets, which is kind of, what you'd expect, I suppose. But yeah, more on the visual side actually than on the text-based side in the School of Art and Design.
I've got one last question, I guess, before we wrap up then. So, what suggestions would you have for somebody who uh, almost wants to be using AI more mindfully and kind of maybe going against the hype of just joining in with any kind of AI trend to generate some stuff just because people can? Do you have any thoughts on what they could say or how they could position themselves so they don't appear to be somebody who is a Luddite?
So I think the first question you should always ask before you hit generate on anything is, do I need to do this? And I have, I am working on a huge project at the minute with a lot of AI in it. And it's really made me, it's tuning my mind into the, am I doing, do I need, there's a kind of like a very honest, do I need to do this or should I not? On a really pragmatic level, never generate in test an idea and generate on minimum pixels first. And I think that's again just like an environmental thing. Um, and then I think it's like challenge yourself. There are platforms where you borrow prompts and you just reuse other people's prompts so you can see yourself in a certain way. And I think if you're going to use, AI can like literally create, it can conjure up the wildest things from your imagination. Why would you go to someone else's imagination? And that's that imagination deficit, isn't it? We should be saying, what can I achieve with this? Where can my brain take me? Instead of what can I just kind of, perpetuate from somebody else's feed and somebody else's content.
Great. Well, thanks again, Jen, for taking part in the Nottingham Technical Festival. It's only by people like yourself offering their free time and insights that the festival's become what it is. So thank you ever so much. Really, really interesting talk. And kind of go away and think about my AI prompts a bit more now. We've got a bunch of other things happening over the next couple of days. So this evening, we've got a responsible AI session that starts at 6. On Thursday, we've got a session around the future of well-being. We've also got a session around circular economy and an empathy lab. And we're also running a lightning talk session in the BGSS office on Thursday evening, which is your opportunity to get up on the stage in a safe space and talk about something that you're passionate about that involves tech, design, innovation, or community. So take a look at the www.nt4g.org/schedule to take a look at those events. And thank you for joining us today. Have a great afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.